This is the Tree of Life, Season 10, Chapter 1. In this episode, we will be elaborating on Season 9, Chapter 9, and incorporating the 9 dialogues of intersection. In past episodes, we discussed how every intersection involves 9 dialogues, corresponding to 9 narratives, corresponding to 9 impulses, each embedded in the one above. The idea was that when two people interact, they are actually expressing 9 levels of meaning corresponding to 9 distinct universes. That each universe is embedded in the one above. In the last episode, we talked about 2 distinct paths between point A and point B. What we can note from the analysis in the last episode is that the convoluted path is embedded in the parsimonious path for the person seated. In other words, what we see is that path 1 is embedded in path 2. This tells us a few things. First, it tells us that the convoluted path, which contains within that intersection a greater number of intersections than does the parsimonious path for person A. It also tells us that the unity of the paths is obviated by nonlinear displacement events for person A. If we imagine that for each level, corresponding to 9 levels, where path 2 is the top level and path 1 is the next lower level, there are a larger number of embedded intersection points. Then we can see that the further you go down through the 9 levels, corresponding to 9 paths, by some arithmetical or exponential relationship, corresponding to the existence of a greater number of nonlinear displacement events between structures, the greater number of intersections embedded in the top path. So for example, we imagine that path 2 is the parsimonious path for person A, possesses not just one intersection, but rather, the further you go down through the dialogues, through the embedding of 9 levels, by some arithmetical relationship a greater number of embedded intersections. Then we can see that the nonlinear displacement, which displaces path 2 to path 1, is a manifestation of the involvement of some other person, person C, in the time between point A and point B, represented by that path. In other words, the further you go down, with increasing convolution, through the 9 levels corresponding to 9 paths, the greater number of intersections, but at the same time, the greater time passes in the path, which means the greater number of other people involved in the path, i.e. person C and others. I cannot say for certain that the number of intersections embedded in the top path increases by some simple relation as you increase path convolution, but what I can say is that nonlinear displacement events are real intersections between person A and some person other than B, somehow connected to B, i.e. C. That's the end of the podcast for today.